direction. You don't turn around. Yes. All right. And down arrow.
It's a down arrow.
Yep. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your morning tea, and I hope that you remembered to book your lunch. Nobody's jumping up in a panic? Good. Everybody's got their lunch underway. All right. I'd like to introduce our first speaker for this concurrent session, Keith Bradby from Gondwana Link in Western Australia. Keith is a long-time advocate for the ecological values of Southwestern Australia and for the power of local communities. He helped establish some of Australia's earliest landcare groups, has run building, beekeeping and native seed businesses, consulted to the mining sector, worked in local enterprise development and at a policy level in government. Currently CEO of Gondwana Link, which he was part of establishing in 2002, and Deputy Chair of the National Landcare Network. Keith, please come to the stage.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Hello, everyone. We're off. First off, I'd just like to pay my respects to the local Bibbulmun people and recognise elders past, present, and our determination to help those who are emerging and rewrite some of what needs to change. This is a painting from a mate of mine in Kojonup, Craig McVie, who chairs the Kojonup Aboriginal Corporation. I like the colours, but I don't quite get what he's saying up there. And I tried to respectfully discuss that with him at one point, and he said, "Just look at what I called it." And that is the reality, and it's a bigger reality than that. Not only are we lost in Noongar land here and are still finding our feet, 200 years is a bare blink, but we're also lost in southwestern Australia. We still haven't understood and listed the various components, and we never will. The plant list for southwest Australia has doubled in the last 30 years. It's a bit like exploring the Amazon and you're still discovering stuff. One plant a week, new to science. Remember some years ago they did the wheat belt survey and Mark Harvey at the museum turned up 720 spiders that he'd never seen before. With that level of ignorance, I just wanted to make the point that we need to proceed cautiously, and we haven't. So the talk is largely about being hopeful, being positive, the optimism, the action-oriented transformation that Anna Polina talked about this morning is where we need to go. And I'm just going to be blindly optimistic and run you through a few stories of what we're doing, and hopefully you can magpie out of that things that are useful to you. I do want to throw a bit of my history in this part of the world on the table first, though. I got dropped into this massive bun fight that was called the Peel Harvey in about 1990. A couple of decades of research had gone on. It was World War III. There was a lot of grumpiness in the community. The then Minister for Agriculture and Water Resources, Ernie Bridge, a Kimberley man, didn't know quite what to do, and he was close to being in breach of WA legal requirements through the EP Act. And he got us to come down and work with some of the locals. And we got him up in a helicopter over the catchment, and he said, "Oh, I can see the problem now. There's a bit of living water, but there's a lot of dead water." That exact phrase that was used in Anna's thing. Bottom line is, in the late 70s and 80s, that water out in front of you there and the bigger estuary was so toxic, it was burning the paint off the plumbing of houses surrounding the estuary. And now it's largely restored. It's healthy. or healthier. We don't celebrate such things enough. And there's the obligatory, the world's going to hell in a handcart slide. Yes, I'm going to be blindly optimistic, but a bit of realism in there. And we should not ever shy away from the fact that the changes we are now facing are profound. We are moving the world out of a climatic and geological era, the Holocene, and who knows where the hell we're going. The Holocene, particularly the latter bits, was when human society developed. We're going to a different place. Fortunately, the response, whoops, did I miss one? Response is happening. We have now entered the United Nations Decade of Ecosystem Restoration. It is about ecological restoration and ecosystems. It includes the stuff we need to live. The Food and Agriculture Organisation are right there. And around the world, there are very, very ambitious programs happening. One I've been involved in, AFR 100. I'm in that photo next to it, which was taken in Solwezi, northern Zambia, to sit with people who have already regenerated 1.5 million hectares and help design the program for the next 5 million hectares. And AFR 100 is about 100 million hectares of regeneration. That is where this continent needs to be as well. So the program I work in is called Gondwana Link. 2002, we projected a crazy vision that the scale, that 30 years of land care and environmentalism had been great, but had not changed any trend lines. And the scale we need to operate in a big country is a big scale. So we drew a swish on a map and said, well, we'll get 1,000 kilometres of connected country from the wet forest through to the dry, across the climate gradient, and in the south. As the climate dries and warms, and it still will, things move south in the southern hemisphere. We are looking after the south. Just before 6 a.m. on June the 5th, World Environment Day, we get the email from the United Nations Environment Program guys. We're one of their founding 50 projects around the world, the only one in Australia, and that makes me both proud and embarrassed. Who are we? Gondwana Link is a loose coalition. I think Anna had a great phrase for it, and I wrote it down and promptly forgot it. But it's a loose coalition of groups that we're not quite sure on how it should be structured, but we've got a not-for-profit company in the middle of it. A number of them are members. It is a mixture of a movement, a network, and an organisation. And I think our current ways of organising society have failed us, and we're part of groping towards better ways of all working together. And it doesn't mean we all got to sit around the table and love each other, because we don't. But we do have to make sure that all the bits we do add up to substantial change. Now I'm going to give you a quick 18, 19 year, 1,000 kilometre bang, bang, bang through some of what's happened. Number one, there is a place called the Great Western Woodlands. It's now recognised as the largest remaining temperate woodland on Earth. It used to be called all that stuff the other side of the wheat belt, between there and the Nullarbor. And it got to be called the Woodlands, mainly because of the work of a small group organised around a fellow called Alexander Watson in the middle, and with a bit of money from 2 streams from America. And he basically just pulled together the existing scientific knowledge and said, oi, West Australia, had you realised that you have this massive woodland out there that's pretty intact? Minister launched it, so did Nudgee Elder Sonny Graham. This is 2008. Wilderness Society's quick work got it into the then state election, a bit of money. We then spent the next couple of years working with the agency and the state government on their next phases, and they spent the money on some nice brochures and a few other things that they were going to do anyway. And and made it quite clear that no extra land was going to be protected because it's a bit of minerals out there. And there was that quandary, which I think is important for West Australians to realise. Sure, we don't actually know where the minerals are, and the new technologies of exploration. There's now Tropicana out under the sand dunes of the desert country on the edge of the woodlands. No one would have thought to look there. Similarly, wherever you looked across the woodlands, you could not prioritise. It's all rich and it all changes. Like the southwest, every 15, 20 kilometres you're into some very different stuff. So anyway, government does what government does, and federal court did what the federal court did. The Mandjoo people had been fighting for 14 years in the courts, and they won. They got their native title rights recognised over 4.5 million hectares of the woodlands, exclusive native title, the largest landholders in southern Australia. And we're able to build on the relationship, fill the void, because they get native title recognised and then they get not much else. And we brought a number of streams of funding together, helped Mandjoo Conservation establish and become the management force critically needed. Each one of those photos tells a really important element of a story. There wasn't a rural fire brigade in Norseman. There now is, and it does cultural fire as well. Water trees, an incredible thing. You train a 500-year-old salmon gum from birth to be a water source. Ngurra Burr, which would cost our sheep industry 50, 60 million bucks a year if it got into WA, they took out the little patch they knew of. Go to Norseman now, you've got all the infrastructure in place. The pub, the IGA, the courthouse, the Shire office, police station, and the ranger base. And 2017, we handed everything over. They run their own show. And Millennium Kids, of course, have been out there and done some great programs. I wanted particularly to put this slide up. The bottom corner over there where I forget which school. Anyway, the annual festival in Boulder, they walked down the street with their big Great Western Woodlands banner and everyone cheered and it was wonderful. That same year, we launched an Australian National University report on carbon in the Great Western Woodlands and damn near got run out of town. Certainly got placarded, and first time I've been placarded by what looked like the Kalgoorlie Chamber of Commerce. Kids can get away with it, and so they should. Oop, here we go. The middle of the link, we've been working reasonably extensively either side of Stirling Range National Park, narrowing the gap. There's been something like 17,500 hectares purchased for conservation across there. There's about 2/3 of it has been replanted. The rest is existing bush that's now under conservation management. This is structural readjustment of a hastily established agricultural landscape for conservation reasons, largely privately funded. And the fundamental point with restoration of our landscapes, our tricky ecosystems and that, as far as we're concerned, yes, we can do it. That's 100 hectare planting. It's taken a fair while for various people who are on that logo landslide to develop the techniques, but we're now at the point where we know we can do it. That's a 3-year-old direct seeded planting from a paddock. It functions like bush. Honey possums back in 4 or 5 years. The full complement of the functional guilds of birds back within 6 or 7 years. And it will take another couple of 100 years to become real bush, but the trend is there and happening. The other critical thing, every decade of my adult life, the wheat belt's lost about 1/3 of its population. Huge amount of social activity building around these things. Most of these are on Eddie Wayon's property. Eddie and Donna were the first 2 people to buy a property, an old battered farm in Gonwanlink, and now run it. It's been the cleared areas are restored. They run a whole heap of citizen science and let's get together and let's fix the place events that 30 or 40 people every 3 months. And Ash, where's Ash? Hi, Ash. Ash at Cranbrook is running this great Kids to Country program. One of the more incredibly important and exciting and so grateful to be able to support is the well, I don't know what to call it, but helping the Noongar and Nudgee folk back onto country and become the land managers. We work with Wadandi a bit, Mount Barker Rangers, Badgerup, Tamblerup, Noangarup, the Willaman people, the Dallarack Aboriginal Corporation in Esperance, 28 full-time equivalent staff, Nudgee in Norseman. None of them existed 15 years ago. Not many of them existed 10 years ago. Some didn't exist 5 years ago. There's an historic change happening where the land managers are coming back. Yeah, we don't spend a lot of money on science because if you do great stuff, they'll come along and check it out. It's not just about species. Can we rebuild the evolutionary processes that are vital to keeping the Southwest healthy? 14 reports that I can barely read, the answer seems to be yes. Very quickly wanted to say we have a similar story to Peel Harvey. The two harbours, nothing to do with us. This was a 30 or 40-year-old effort. The Albany harbours were also close to toxic and Oyster Harbour had lost its seagrass. It's now back. And that's the 30 or 40-year community effort which we are now building on and helping these groups further. Got to celebrate this stuff. Whoa! Yeah. We haven't done much in the forest, partly capacity, partly such an amazing group of people who've worked for so long and to be able to honour that now with this result is great. So, some very quick dot points and then Nicole can relax about timing. I hope, this is more for discussion. I'll be around all day. Transitional change has come from thinking big. Just putting a bigger vision out there has been colossally important. And we organisationally haven't had to do everything because people like bigger visions. Got on and did things. We didn't do a plan. The rest follows. You do build on decades of effort. And the other one I'll pick up there, planting seeds through sharing with others. And we've had 2 conversations elsewhere already today about, you remember that conversation you had with so-and-so 20 years ago? A green skills conversation came up over breakfast. Yeah, well, that guy now runs the biggest revegetation program in South Australia. What am I seeing as broad trends? We don't need a lot more science. I think the community support is massive. The government support is minimal. That's going to change. First Nations are up there. Yes, we had to stop logging, but look at all the other things we're able to start. And the amount of money that's looking at large-scale regeneration, restoration across the wheat belt zones of Western Australia is eye-watering at the moment. We need to make sure it lands the right way in the right places. And again, Ash, I've used the local community example where Gillamai Landcare Centre and North Stirling are working to make sure the benefits are not just coming ecologically, but to the community effort. That's what we're trying to do more at the moment. You've missed a great talk. It's just finishing in one of the other rooms where Suzanne and Sandra from Margaret River are talking about what I'd summarise as restoration. Ecosystem restoration is a public health imperative. We are what we breathe. And there's heaps of data out there now on the benefits of biodiverse systems for human health. Wanted to quickly mention there's some educational material. If you haven't looked at the Minute Earth video, Why Poor Places Are More Diverse, it's a little 3-minute one, 15 grand expenditure, 2.5 million hits so far. Cry for the Forest is sitting up the back and we're going to have a look at that soon. 2 videos you can get off feature films you can get off Rossen, films for your schools. One of them more recent, it's almost a before and after, knocking it down, standing it up again, and some shorts we've got. And because it's Nicole, I won't mention Heartland Journeys, which is a new website we're doing to use tourism as adult education, and we think it'll be useful for schools too. The end point is it's good to keep doing wacky things that bring science and art and what the hell is it anyway, that actually bring delight and joy and excitement to people, and hopefully we're doing a bit of that too. Of course. Thank you.
Keith, when you put up that slide, as you called it, the avalanche of logos, I thought, and working for me, I thought, how in the hell do you get that to work? But clearly you do, because having all those disparate groups, but obviously with that one key objective in mind, is fantastic. So well done to you and your multitude of organisations. Congratulations. Thank you. Our next speaker, Angela Rossen, a biodiversity educator based here in Western Australia. Angela is an artist, biodiversity educator and science communicator. She's run a busy studio practice for 40 years and worked with research scientists since 2009. Known for her paintings of WA environment, she collaborates with research biologists to create an interface for scientists to share their current research. Angela designs and presents site-specific biodiversity workshops, field events and festivals throughout the metropolitan, regional and remote Australia, with school and community groups to observe and document whole system ecologies and associated plants and animal communities. These events bring together research and educational institutions, local government and NRMs to engage, educate and grow community around protection and conservation of nature. Thank you, Angela. Down arrow. Okay, that's the second one.
Well, it's great to be here. It's been a fantastic trip, this whole conference, and I'm really proud to have been invited to speak. I'd like to pay my respects to the Noongar Whadjuk people on whose lands we stand, and acknowledge that we've got a great deal to learn from them and all of the Indigenous people of our beautiful land. I would like to say that I really liked what you said. Well, I liked everything you said, Keith. That was totally inspirational. But we absolutely need to work together so that all that we do adds up to substantial change. And that's what we've got to. That's why we've got to be watching what we're all doing and making sure that we key in together. And why this conference is such a lovely opportunity to share our ideas. So in this presentation, I'd like to offer some examples of cross-disciplinary collaborations that I and others have delivered, so it's not just my stuff. And not all of these are environmental education, but they are about opening a discussion about ways that we can communicate more effectively, more vitally, more from the heart. And I'd like to also open a discussion about resourcing or funding of the work that we do. I'll just go back to that one. Yes, that's that one. The first question we've got to ask is, what do we do? Why do we do it? And we all sort of know, and we've all been talking about it in this wonderful conference, but we've got to keep coming back to what we're doing, because it's very easy to be sidetracked by those pressures that are levied against us if we're fighting for funding and fighting for other resources and all the rest of it. Sometimes you just kind of, certainly I work on my own, although I work in collaboration. You've got to be careful you don't sort of disappear up and through a no-end path. I think what we know is that by getting people to make a heart connection to land, to nature, we're going to change their behaviours. And this is kind of a pretty obvious example. that's a heartbreaking photo, that little bird that's flown all the way along the East Asian flyway and it got squashed by somebody who just drove their car down the beach. And we can't constantly be having these scary and sad photos, but they are part of the story. So what I'm highly motivated by is the fact that change comes through education and through these exposures that little kids have to the idea that the environment's something precious and wonderful and belongs to them. It encourages them to get more involved in one way or another. And when I see kids going off to become scientists or getting excited about doing science, or I meet kids I worked with 20 years ago and they say they've just finished an environmental science degree, I feel really excited. So it's innovations like this that are so stunningly exciting. It was in The Guardian, lovely article in The Guardian recently. Each of us have, of course, different talents to bring nature into the hearts of children and their families and the wider community. But environmental education is something of a poor cousin in most institutions, I think you'll agree. And that it's delivered by inspired teachers and individuals whose work is often in their own time. I can't tell you how many teachers have told me that they're really proud that their principal's happy for them to do this project, but of course they have to do it in their own time, which is simply not sustainable. Climate change is the greatest existential threat that our species have ever encountered, actually created. Industrial pollution and other human impacts, as we know, are altering the very systems that we need to live. So pressure has to be levied on those entities who profit by activities that destroy the biosphere. And that's only going to happen with education, because when we bring people on board through a heart connection, through a real connection where they fall in love again with all those things they take for granted, namely nature, then they're going to stand up for it. The pandemic, which is only a subset of climate change, actually, has taught us some really great things as it happens. It's taught our government that their mantra of debt and deficit was a furphy, a complete nonsense. There's all that money there to deal with the pandemic. Now they have to use that money to deal with climate change. And with COP26 coming up, we're all waiting, of course, with our breath held to see what our glorious leader decides, what kind of pledges he's going to make, if any. It is the informed and furious population who are going to push those changes, and we're at the very heart of that. But we're also living at a really exciting time of massive manufacturing change. And I went to the Comms Council annual convention the other day, and I just came away with my heart singing, because Piers Verstegen in his opening address laid out the opportunities that are available here in WA, which is what Clean State have focused on, the job opportunities that are going to come out of all these new growth areas in relation to the new green economy. And it's mind-bogglingly exciting. As Keith said, there's money, there's heaps of money. And we've got to find out how to be part of that story, because that transition has to happen with educators, creative educators and facilitators like us. The financial case, etc., etc. So it's only when we change our thinking about funding that others are going to too. So for too long, we've accepted a kind of a mendicant position where we go, well, you know, if you can give me some money, I'll find a way to do the rest. Now, I've got a reticulation guy putting reticulation on my front verge, and if in the early stages of his quote I said to him, look, I'm going to pay you for 3 days' work, provided you'll do 2 days in-kind support, he would have laughed at me. Well, we are told this every day of our lives, I think you might agree. And the time has come for us to say, no, that's not how it works. I have to pay my dentist, and he should be paid, and the reticulation man, and I'm an educator and I should be paid. This is not about whinging. This is about saying there's a different way of doing it, which is really, really, really exciting. I would like to say that educators, much like artists and scientists, mostly subsist on small grants that take a lot of resources to win, and often come with onerous conditions, like gag orders. And it is ironic that in our country, those very entities who are poisoning the atmosphere are being given the licence to distribute money for such things. And there's some of their branding at this conference. And I'll just refer you to the Fringe Festival, where Woodside gave a very small amount of money and funding towards the Fringe Festival here in Perth on the proviso that no performer made any political statement. Well, we shouldn't. We simply shouldn't put up with that kind of thing, and that's what we've been putting up with for too long. That money is also funding, that dirty money is also funding scientific research with the obvious outcome that there is some element of gag. However, it doesn't have to be like that, because the growth in green technology innovations in food production, transport, and every sector of manufacturing are attracting the interests of venture capitalists and companies who want to invest. And they want to purchase for themselves social license. We've just got to think bigger. This is where we come in. I'm at the beginning of this trajectory. I did go to another forum. Oh, I refer you to that document. Get your phone out, take a photo of that, download it and read it. It's going to make your day, it'll make your month, it'll make your year. This is the Clean State proposal for 350,000 jobs out of the green sector. And it's doable, it's well researched. It is a very important document that the state government is taking notice of. Hooray. So what I was saying is that I come in at the very beginning of this trajectory because, oh, did you get that, by the way? Did everyone get it? Yep. Okay. Or ask me later, I've got to stand outside. Come and talk to me. Come and talk to me. Let's do this together. I don't have that fancy economic language. So I went the next day, or, well, where is it? To the Blue Growth Forum, which was about investment in blue carbon or the ocean. So green investment in the ocean. And I went to listen to how these financial people talked. And I spent the whole time writing down words to look up later. Because that's not what we do. We think differently. Well, we've just got to change that. We've got to get into that other headspace and do it. So let's start that conversation. Let's get into it. Let's make it happen. I don't know how, but it's there, and I feel very confident that we can turn around the whole environmental education sector if we demand to be treated equally. So that's some blah about different government departments and funding and where you go and blah, blah, you know it all. We can change the system, we just got to believe it. It's a little bit like, you know, the civil rights movement or women's emancipation. For too long, we've kind of gone, please, will you give me a little bit of money and I'll do this much. Well, it's over now. I'll do this much and you give me that much money, because I can tell you that the guys who did a bit of building out the back of my place, they added a whole lot of extra figures in case they encountered limestone. Well, that's what we should do. There wasn't any, as it happens, but you know what I'm talking about. We should factor in the real costs of our projects. So I'm going to, I hope that some of these thoughts stimulate discussion and ideas and action, because we've got to think differently about what we do. So now I'll just talk briefly about what I do, and it's a big, huge slideshow. Can I ask, is there a lighting person there, or there's nobody? Is there? I just have a bit of difficulty seeing. Can you make the screen really bright and all these other lights, because you don't need to look at me, you just need to look at pictures. Great, thank you. Because we're so multimodal, we work across many sectors and with diverse communities. And in the following section, I'll showcase a number of community engagement projects and put forward, just for your consideration, some methodologies that might be interesting. And I'd be really interested to hear from you too. So, partnerships come from unexpected places. This was a painting of Bush Tucker in a school, and the money came from the Police Graffiti Task Force. So sometimes when you kind of look outside of the space, exciting things happen. The delivery of mental health services is an opportunity for us to bring nature to a highly vulnerable group. And it just makes perfect sense. It's the absolute connection. So this is a regional community garden centre where people with identified mental health problems and other vulnerable groups were part of the whole project. And because of that, the community garden centre got really good funding. Obviously, the work environmental educators do in growing community cannot be understated. We bring people together to have a fun time, and we do it really well, and we work really hard together. And because it's from the heart, it's completely different to a fully commercial transaction. And I love that about the work that I do. I think that nature is the most logical pathway to working with Indigenous youth and their communities, and it actually opens up opportunities to learn from and with Indigenous communities. Not that we go in and tell them something, but that we are amongst them and we work together and we have all sorts of exciting times discovering, documenting nature, rebuilding nature, however it works, and Keith spoke about that very eloquently. So the next group that I want to talk about is New Australians, and our migrant communities arrive here often traumatised by their journey and by the shameful treatment of our government, which I won't dwell on at this moment, but one of the best ways to become engaged in a new home is to learn about nature, and I think that we can do that. We can do it fabulously well. Spiders, poisonous snakes, things in the water that bite you, sharks, whoa, all those scary things that New Australians are frightened of. The fact that we grow up jumping around in the water and New Australians come, they see us playing wildly in the water and they don't realise that we never take our eyes off a wave, and then they get drowned because they don't know the basic rules. Well, our education, our work, what we do with engaging people with the environment can be through many different modalities. I just see teaching swimming as part of growing community, as part of connecting people to the ocean, about talking about biota on the beach, and then bring them into the bigger picture of the biodiversity of the place. And talking about things like worm farms, because the level of waste that we have in Australia is something new to New Australians who've often come from poor countries, and the understanding of how marvellous it is, the creatures that live under the soil. I've had the good luck to work with soil scientists, and getting them involved in documenting and observing so that it doesn't all seem so foreign. My own mother arrived here in 1962 with a whole stack of young children in a heat wave, and she thought she'd come to the end of the world. She was completely overwhelmed and she was very lonely for where she'd come from. And it wasn't until she saw the work of Bob Juniper that she began to see the poetry in the country. So if she had somebody who'd said to her, hey, come and look at these beautiful flowers, this is how they disperse seeds, or this is how we propagate them, or something, she would have been, saved from that terrible feeling of alienation and dreadful loneliness for the place left behind, which must be the situation for a lot of New Australians, particularly people who left their homes unwillingly. I think that's a huge sector that we have to get into. This is not my work. This is the work of a most wonderful woman called Samia Jabor, who's of Palestinian origin, and she did this incredible work with Palestinian diaspora, where she invited women from all over Australia who were connected to Palestine but may never actually have been there. Like their families may have lived in another country in a refugee camp and eventually found their way to Australia. And they sat down and they embroidered their stories. They embroidered their particular knowledge. They shared their particular knowledge. They made their stories. This is a beautiful embroidery that Samia made to celebrate her father. Very touching and beautiful. And very powerful, because that formed a whole community of people who would have been sitting sadly in different pockets all over the country, and now they're a community. Now, something that's so important to our work is sharing ideas and connecting, and I have to put this TED talk up. Please take a photo of the screen. Have I got the name of it? Yes. This guy decided to pair up people who had different political opinions to talk, and 2 minutes, whoa, I better go fast. And what happened was that he created these amazing connections between people in different countries across different socioeconomic groups who wound up, and they were selected for different political viewpoints, and they wound up with this outcome and many other good outcomes. I spent 6 months interviewing people about climate change with the Australian Conservation Foundation, and what I learnt was people love to talk, people love to share their ideas, people are not quite so sure as they thought they were. And you learn to say, I don't know, and you listen to people, and it's a fantastic thing to do. It has to be part of our practice to listen to people. So I better flick through this really quick, but I paint nature, I take kids into nature, and try to find fun ways for them to drill down into it. I spend as much time as possible in the ocean. That's my studio, and I make paintings. So sorry, I've got to flick through it fast. I mean, oh my God, imagine if we lost these beautiful things. I work with scientists in a number of contexts to take their work out to communities, and it's always exciting and interesting to do so. So you've got to look really fast. So this is a pairing. It's all about pairing with different organisations to have really fun, exciting outcomes. And food. Always have food. Kids are a great way to start because kids change the world. And then finding cute, fun ways to get the whole community involved. That was a blow-up screen, an inflatable screen. So I've just returned from doing a full community biodiversity festival in Denham, and it was to celebrate the work done by DBCA to completely restore the island of Dirk Hartog, which is an amazing project that's still in process. I had the good fortune to work with scientists and to observe and record what they were doing, and then come back to Denham. I'm going through it so fast that the thing can't click through. Coming back to Denham and creating 10 different workshops and nature events where people observed and recorded their own place, the biota of their own place, and the incredible work that's happening on Dirk Hartog Island with the 13 translocated species. And it was really fun. Really, really fun. People got together and in making their paintings and drawings, they talked. And it's about setting up environments where people talk. Little kids, big kids. I painted the background of a painting and the children painted in all of the animals. And their work was absolutely and utterly stunning. I think we underestimate children. So that's the painting. And then after, oh yes, we did a puppet show with the Littlies, making a show about how invasive species destroy environments. And then videos, these kids learn how to make videos, and you can always clothe your activities in other learning areas. So it's exercise and digital learning, not environmental exercise. So just slip it in under the radar. And then we had an exhibition. And this exhibition had over 350 pieces of art created by those people, paintings, drawings, photographs. And what happened was they retold the story of the whole revegetation and introduction of species to Dirk Hartog Island. So it's a really fun way to get people completely immersed in an environment that belongs to them. It was beautiful, really beautiful. Everybody got in the spirit. It's really nice to see your own work put up in a formal atmosphere when you started the project by saying, I really can't draw a stick insect, a stick figure, well, because everyone's got it in them. Photocomp, that's always a good way to get people in. And then using the DBCA messaging to, which of course everybody ignored because they were only looking at their own pictures, but that's okay, I'll let DBCA hang their thing. That was funded by DBCA, and it was a really successful and fantastic project. Also, this is from another project I did, but it's really nice to bring the scientists out of the laboratory, shake them off a little bit and get them to talk to people. So I'm worried. I don't know about you, but I'm worried. And that's what motivates me, to try and make a difference by getting people involved in loving nature, falling in love with it again, and then getting up off their chair and doing something. And that something might be protesting, writing to the Prime Minister. I like to write 3 letters to politicians before breakfast every day. Studying science, whatever. Whatever our environmental education moves people into, we've made a difference. So that's it. Thank you very much. And I just wanted to say one last thing, and that is our capital is our creativity, our connectivity, and our communication skills. So let's get real investment, so we can do it better and stop accepting the crumbs off the table. Let's turn it around. Thank you, Keith. Thank you very much. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll swap you. Thank you so much. That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you, Angela, for your many stories, and I'm sure that there will be many people who will want to catch up with you at lunchtime and have a chat. Our next speaker needs coffee. Dr. Rachel Sheffield from Curtin University, Western Australia. Rachel Sheffield is an Associate Professor in the School of Education at Curtin University. She researches and publishes in science, STEM education and professional identity, and is currently exploring the transversal competencies and their role in STEM. Through her research and grants, she has travelled to India, Indonesia and Malaysia, supporting pre-service teachers and primary students develop expertise in STEM content and skills. The STEMness group she co-founded supports women in STEM education and was nominated for the 2019 Premier Science Awards and the 2020 UNESCO Prize for Girls in Science for the impact on women in STEM. Thank you, Rachel. Yes, bad luck. That's the down arrow.
The down arrow. What time's lunch? No, it's always good to start before, if you're starting just before lunch, it's always good to know when lunch is, Michael. When's lunch? Oh, I've got ages yet then. Right, all right, good to know, good to know. Oh, the screen is awful because that's a beautiful picture. I can see what Angela meant. I was interested in environmental education and I came late to the party. So I'm a science educator and I work in STEM. And in 2019, I was very fortunate to be part of the Homeward Bound program that went to Antarctica. And in the fish trap, about half an hour ago, you'd have heard a little bit more about that. So I came back and I went, I'm a science person. What do students actually know about the environment? And for my pre-service teachers, what do they intend to do? What's their intention? So at the moment, there are 330 students. I feel I've had an email from every one of them in the last 24 hours because their assignment's due tomorrow. And they're doing inquiry programs around sustainability. But I didn't actually know what they knew about it, what their understandings were, what their behaviour was, and what their attitudes were. So I went on a little bit of a journey. I have to say that these pictures were all taken from the north of Western Australia because I've been on country with our university. And at this point, I'd like to recognise the Indigenous leaders of today and into the future and pay my respects to them. But going on country was a very powerful experience. And so these photos come from that journey. So I wanted to know what the environmental literacy was. I wanted to know what sustainability looked like. And I thought I'd go and find out what students thought. Because if I knew where they started, then I was able to make changes to their behaviour, possibly. So I went out to look for something that was going to be helpful. And I found this really, really nice model that looked at knowledge, behaviour and beliefs. And it came from an environmental literacy survey that was rolled out in Taiwan relatively recently. I'll go back that way. Yeah, in 2018, and they did it with 20,000 students. So I figured this would be a really interesting study to do. And it looked at what they knew about some environmental issues, and we didn't cover them all, what their behaviour was likely to be, and what they believed, so that we could bring that all together and talk about how they might act, because this is all about action. We did it with pre-service teachers. As I said, there are 300 of them currently working, but in the OUA, there's up to 700 or 800 at a time. So we have a very large cohort, and they're all first years, and they're all going to be teacher educators. I've used this survey also overseas in India. It's been rolled out in Africa, and we're still looking at that data. But I just thought I'd present today on my pre-service teachers, because they're going to be the educators for tomorrow. So if we're going to get change happening in classrooms with students, the programs that you guys are running are amazing, but the teachers have to come in with an acceptance for what you guys are doing, and they have to come in with a background knowledge of why it's important. So I guess that's my job. So we had predominantly, and this is really interesting, predominantly We have a female cohort. So 86%, that hasn't changed in the last decade. 86% of all our students in the primary and early childhood are female. So we're looking at very small numbers for males. And I thought also it's quite interesting that their age group is quite spread. Not many over 50, not many over 40, but a lot in the 31 to 40, which is quite surprising. And so we asked them, I don't know if you can see the corner of that. So we looked at where they were. So some were primary education students, secondary, early childhood. The primary and early childhood have to do it. It's a core unit. They hate it. Well, no, they don't hate it. But once they finish, they'll like it. At the moment, they're not having a good time, I can tell you from the emails. I've got a 531 in this present, and the cohort that's just finishing at the moment hasn't been included. I haven't dealt with the data. So we asked them questions about what they knew. So we asked them a number of these kinds of questions. So burning lots of coal and oil and fossil fuel will lead to less ozone in the atmosphere. 62% got that right. It's interesting though, they've come straight out, some of them have come straight out of school and they don't know the answer to that. So that was kind of interesting question. We don't know why they got it wrong either. So that was. We asked them, this is the Fitzroy River. I had a student look at the sawfish in the Fitzroy River. So this seemed to be a suitable picture. Excess algae, they're a little bit more confident in this, but still there was a fair number of them that were not confident with these statements, which we thought were fairly straightforward. Lots of them didn't know anything about the Kyoto Protocol. So that was but again, these are only so many questions you can ask. We didn't do any interviews to follow up. Looking at environment, about biodiversity and what that meant, a little bit more confident with that one. The greenhouse effect, again, lots of really low levels of confidence with this. These are all. This picture is. I did some work in One Arm Point. That's up at One Arm Point. Just by the way. So they looked at what was not a greenhouse gas and how they managed with that. I'm sure you know which one's not a greenhouse gas, but I put it in because I thought maybe that might be something you'd need. And then we asked a little bit about solar panels. It was interesting to see how many. Lots of them lived at home, but lots of them didn't have solar panels. And if they did have solar panels, what was the reason? And then we asked them about their beliefs. So the mean and standard deviation, the mean should be quite high. When you talk about beliefs, it should be quite high. The ones that are lower are indicated. So out of 5, a lot of them are very strongly limited. They look after these supplies and things like this. This was interesting. When I go out, I'm willing to walk, cycle, or take public transport. Not that keen, just saying. I support the reduction of the number of household garbage collection days. Not keen on that either. I can classify different types of recyclable items. Not very confident. So you can see, and some of these other ones, I can convince my family members, they're also not that good, to undertake environmental actions. So this is about behaviour. I think the other one was about attitudes. Oh, that's beliefs, and this is about behaviour. So what we found was they had high levels of beliefs, but they weren't prepared to action, some of them. They were less keen. There was an interesting difference between gender, and I was going to ask the young lady that presented on the first day if she'd found differences in gender in her data. The males were much less likely to action for the environment, and hence there's only like Michael because he has to be in here, and very few other men in the room. So I wonder if that's just with my students or it's a larger group. We did look at the engineering students as well as a cohort, and I'm still to report on there. They have strong beliefs, they're less likely to action, and their knowledge is quite patchy. So how do we remediate that? But I thought this was at least a good place to start around telling this story. That's a broom sunset. It's quite good. And so I think we start as a position to say that we need more work when they come out of school. And so some really, really nice research that's been offered. So on, how long have we been here? Tuesday, there was some really nice work that they were doing around climate emotions and climate change. That's Sonia and I sat in on with Tanya. So that was really good online. So there's some really nice resources out there, but I think we've got work to do with our pre-service teachers so that they come out and want to engage in this area. I'd love some questions. I didn't go very long. It's all right, Michael's surprised. Are there any questions? Yeah.
Sorry, Dr. Sheffield, can you please speak into the microphone so the live stream can hear you?
I can take the microphone if I want to. I'll put it back.
Can you please stay standing and so the live stream can see you?
Oh, I don't want to be seen by the live stream. I think that's a really interesting statement, and I think it's absolutely true that teachers don't often, but I think there's a very steep learning curve when it comes. So I'm not trying to bag my pre-service teachers. I'm interested in where their starting point and what we can do to help provide them with skills. But that 4-year degree is busy, and there is lots and lots of competing aspects in literacy and numeracy, and we're all fighting. So, I mean, Sonia and I are going to have to mud wrestle with maths for extra opportunities to teach environmental science, because I mud wrestled with maths to get an extra science inquiry unit in the first year. Because when I first started, they had one science unit if they were doing primary. They had half a science unit, because we shared it with HAS, if they were doing early childhood. That's not acceptable. And so, you know, and then it was competing with all the others, the things that need to go on in that space. So I would like to see, and Sonia and I are now negotiating with scheming probably, with Hannah, how we can do this to bring more of this conversation in and where to put it into our curriculum, where we still meet all the checks and balances that go with it. So TEXA and accredit, because we have to be accredited. So I think you're right. I think they don't, and I think we need to do work to help them. Am I done? What am I? I'm always in trouble. Yes, please. If I can't move, you've got to talk into the microphone.
Yeah, is this research something you're planning on doing long term to see if there are changes across, 5, 10, 15 years as such?
Absolutely. I think it's really interesting. We've used, as I said, the survey is validated, so we're using it, and at the moment it's in its 3rd iteration. So the students are coming into their 2nd year of being asked to participate in it, and I kind of hedge it up in the top of that unit. So, week 1, while you're enthusiastic, fill in the survey. But, I mean, we can only have as many students as wants to participate. But I think it would be very interesting, because I think there's a change coming in this space. But I don't want to make students anxious either. I think there's got to be balance. So yes, next question. Hi.
Hi. So I teach education for sustainability through Little Green Steps for early childhood educators. And what I do find is curriculum can be a directive, especially cross-curriculum priorities for a lot of teachers. Once they are teachers, I think it becomes sort of a bit of a priority. Are you finding any of that in your... I know it's pre-service, so you probably haven't. But...
No, I mean, the problem is with sustainability is it got put in the cross-curricular priorities. It's very vague. I don't think the statements are particularly helpful. My students are now having to link what they've been doing for the last 10 weeks to that framework. And it's really quite difficult, even for someone like with experience. The general capabilities have elements and sub-elements in them. At least you can map them more easily. So when I work with those, and I do with that when I work in Makerspace, we look at those. I think these are important. The language at the moment is saying that employers want skills. They want 21st century skills, which we call transversal competencies. They want them to be able to communicate, collaborate, be critical and creative thinkers. We need to make that happen. They can Google anything else. Really, seriously, they can. So we need to take those on board, and sustainability is another thing that I think is super important. So I think we have to go in, and this is what Sonia was saying with her 3-minute thesis yesterday. It's really important to get changes to governance, and the best way to get changes in curriculum is assessment, because the assessment drives everything else. So if we could get ownership of the sustainability in the cross-curricular priorities to somewhere, I don't mind, science will take it, HAS could take it, STEM can take it, whoever can, English, people find it. But if you can have someone that actually puts their hand up and says, it's here and we need to put it in a meaningful way, then I think that's when we're going to start to drive some of the change. And that's what the literature says about sustainability. Isn't that right, Sonia?
I just have a question. With your study, it was undergraduate students?
Yeah, they're first years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you thought about if there's a difference between postgrad, like masters, but still pre-service first year type thing?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one, and I certainly would go back. We don't have the numbers. This is a particularly nice survey because it's a ticky box one. So it's a particularly good one to run with a big cohort. We don't have really large cohorts, but yeah, absolutely. But any time you need to do this, the ethics and stuff is a little bit, that's why we end up in India and places like that. They go, yes, we'll do your survey, no problem. Send the electrodes over. We'll plug them in and switch them. No. But they don't have the ethics, whereas we have ethics. 2 minutes. Has anyone got any more other questions or comments? Yes, please. I'd love that kind of communication.
Hi, just wondering, as mentors of pre-service teachers when they're coming into our schools, do you have any suggestions about what we could be sort of integrating into PL for them?
I think when they come in to see you as pre-service teachers, the cognitive load for them is enormous because they're coming into a school, they're trying to work out what they need to focus on. So although I'd love to say, yes, we could certainly focus on it, I think it's something that comes with time. That, the first thing they need to find is, what time do I eat and where's the bathroom? And then they work their way from there. So if they do have capacity, absolutely, I think it's something we can certainly, and having information about programs, I think is also very helpful. So I come in and take things that I think will be helpful in order to provide them with information. But their focus is probably at the moment on passing the units. And then it won't be, I need this resource until they're out there. And once they start their journey, probably second year, it'd be like, I could do with some resources now. So you actually need to find them then when they're searching, and be able to say, here's a bank of really good resources that's going to help you. And there could be the person from Little Green Steps, might have Little Green Feet too, but Little Green Steps and places like that can help them to do that. Otherwise, it's a vast network of information for them to take in. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Maybe there's a time for sustainability to be a learning area in its own right. That's the way to go. And you're absolutely spot on that assessment is the driver as well. Thank you again. I'd now like to introduce Kim Beasy. That's not Beasley, but Beasy, from the University of Tasmania. Kim is an active researcher across curriculum and pedagogic areas and is involved with a number of research projects, including formal and informal sustainability education in schools and the value in diverse professional development opportunities for teachers. She is chair of the Education for Sustainability Tasmania Network, a UN recognised regional centre of expertise, and actively involved in community projects that encourage sustainability in the community and inclusive education in schools. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm going to be presenting today on exploring changes in perceptions and practices of sustainability in ESD communities in Australia during the COVID-19 pandemic. Now I'm presenting this paper, but it is a collaboration between myself and Dr. Laura Rapol Gonzalez from Griffith University. If you're interested in having a look at the paper in more detail, it is available through the Journal of Education for Sustainable Development. Now, in this presentation, I reflect on how personal experiences of COVID may or may not have influenced a perceptible and behavioural shift in an EFS community in Australia. So for the purposes of the study that I'm talking about here today, EFS and ESD communities is kind of thought about as an open concept, which includes formal and informal actors or stakeholders. So an Australian not-for-profit organisation was selected, the Sustainable Schools Network Limited, and we use that as a case study. So participants in the study attended an online sustainability symposium in April 2020, which brought together an EFS community to scope and build the future of EFS in Australia. So utilising the symposium as a platform for critical thinking around what sustainability looks and should look like in formal and also informal education settings, we combined a survey of the symposium participants with in-depth interviews with the presenters at the symposium after the event to try and understand how COVID and the crisis of COVID back in those early stages of COVID, because obviously we're still very much living and working in a COVID-dominated environment, how those early stages of COVID affected people's perceptions and practices of sustainability. Now, the SSN is an Australian not-for-profit that focuses on leveraging the education community around schools towards sustainable practices and behaviours. So the SSN suggests that ESD is most likely to occur when whole school communities participate and work together, including teaching and operational staff, students, families, and communities. The aim of the SSN is to educate and connect members of the school community to imagine a sustainable future. So the SSN works with state and private primary and secondary schools across Australia, as well as other environmental organisations, local and state governments, tertiary institutions, and other members of civil society interested in ESD. So the foundation of the SSN model is to create, or the creation of partnerships to increase participation in ESD, primarily across the primary and secondary education sectors. So the 2020 Sustainability Symposium offered learning opportunities to the whole school community to both inspire change and collective and collective action, hopefully to leave this legacy of relationships and resources that could continue toward building a sustainable future. You can see the aims of the symposium on the screen here. So this was the context of the research. Now, the second SSN symposium was held online via Zoom and brought together an ESD community consisting of educators, parents, community and sustainability education service providers interested in ESD to foster the development of partnerships and innovation for ESD. Although originally scheduled as a face-to-face event, a total of 60 schools and 80 organisations participated in various capacities in a series of online seminars due to COVID-19 restrictions. So the face-to-face event had to move swiftly online, which I'm sure would be an experience that many of us are still very much experiencing today. So, well, right now, in fact, at the A2E2 conference. So a total of 345 adult registrations were recorded. So the broader project, which this data is coming from, and I'm presenting on here, was sourced to investigate attendees' ESD perceptions and practices. This presentation focuses specifically on that research question on the screen here. So to undertake the research, we used a mixed methods research design, so combining online survey of attendees with the semi-structured interviews of symposium organisers and presenters. All were invited to reflect on their practices and perceptions of sustainability. So the choice of mixed methods research was useful for us, knowing that we were after an exploratory study that was really investigating quite a complex phenomenon. So thematic analysis was used to analyse the data. We utilised NVivo, which is a qualitative data analysis program. So I analysed the data applying a mix of deductive and inductive coding, surface reading, survey question responses, and transcripts to identify the main themes in the data set. So initial coding was then reviewed by Laura to ensure validity, and then thematic codes were developed and relevant data was coded thereafter. Now, just to give you some sense of who the data is coming from, most survey participants were female, around 82%, aged between 30 years and about 60, and resided in Queensland, Australia, where the symposium was scheduled to take place and also where SSN is based. So the capacity in which participants were attending is shown on the slide here, just to give you a breakdown of roles or self-identified roles. And the sample had long been engaged in the education community since the average number of years that participants had been engaged in working with children was about 15. So interview participants included members of the SSN board, small business owners, environmental consultants, and environmental ESD education service providers. A total of 72% of survey respondents agreed that their perceptions or practices of sustainability had changed due to the COVID pandemic, and most interviewees suggested that their perceptions had changed in some way. So 26 survey participants provided some qualitative responses that we were able to use, and an analysis of those revealed that about 8 participants discussed the ways that the pandemic had demonstrated a significant change to human behaviour, or that change within human behaviour is possible. There was another 7 that suggested that the COVID pandemic had demonstrated, I guess, the opportunity to change personal practices in response to, I guess, change or to the pandemic. And 5 participants were expressing hope and increased appreciation for the environment being repaired in response to less human activity which they had been witnessing through mainstream social media. Other themes emerging from the open-ended responses included perceptual changes, so inequity between countries in their ability to respond to crises, the significance of social, community and collaborative approaches to sustainability, and also how COVID had enabled time for reflection as it slowed down the pace and provided opportunities to pause, think and make choices that have a positive impact. So these themes were similarly found among interviewees' responses. Interestingly, the interviews revealed an additional theme related to the need for innovation in ESD for more sustainable practices, which was linked to the perceived lack of training by educators in ESD. So this may reflect the level of knowledge around ESD and the background of interviewees, I guess from that broader social community network, which we'll explore a little bit more through this presentation. Speaking of which, where I'm going to take us to next is a look at some of the main findings from the data that we collected, very much from a change perspective, and you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. So one of the themes that we identified was this notion that people can change. So qualitative comments from both interviews and surveys reflected a willingness to change and a new sense of hope in raising the profile of sustainability in education contexts, informed by participants' perceived positive impacts of restricted human mobility due to the spread of COVID on the environment. So participants noted that observing the collective uptake of social isolation actually demonstrated people's capacity to change and provided examples of the impact that this can have for sustainability, which they became exposed to through their engagement with traditional media and particularly social media. So even though symposium attendees were generally already interested and involved in ESD, which is important to bear in mind through this presentation, what we can see in the quote though is that it reinforced motivation to promote change, resulting from, I guess, the observation of concrete examples of how individual efforts visibly contribute to large-scale positive environmental change. So COVID in this way enabled participants to participate in change and to reflect on how abstract concepts like global environmental damage and inequality could be influenced by individual and collective action. So the positive and perceived environmental outcomes portrayed in traditional and social media globally encouraged a sense of hope and optimism among participants in the role of EFS. So the images and stories on nature restoration flowing from around the world in the public sphere supported this general feeling that positive environmental change on this collective scale is indeed possible, and subsequently resulted in an increased willingness to support a change in practice towards a sustainability education paradigm. Another theme that came through was this idea of I can change. So dominant discourses of sustainability often focus on changes in individual consumer behaviour and daily practices, like engaging in waste management and using modes of active transportation. A reduction in travel due to lockdowns, which enabled working and learning from home, was noted by participants as having a positive effect for sustainability. So in addition, a perceived level of agency afforded through COVID to live a life they felt was more aligned with sustainability aspirations was actually came through really strongly through speaking with participants. So as shown on the slide, one interviewee gave an account of newly found patterns of sustainable production and consumption and practices established to reduce their carbon footprint while in isolation. So these comments and perceptions reflect broader debates on the level of agency of individuals in creating change towards sustainability. So often practices like travelling to work and consumption options constrain individuals' ability to engage in sustainable practices. Notably, what we found was that participants reported a perception that they had to implement sustainability initiatives in their personal lives prior to COVID social responses. So this might in part, since participation in the symposium warrants interest in ESD. Hopefully you can make the connections there. So in this sense, despite the interest already and willingness to engage in positive behaviour change for sustainability, actually what we know from the literature already is that it does take more than a positive environmental mindset to change behaviour. So participants' reflections really suggest that when conditions like disruption to accepted norms related to going to work arise, actually change then becomes possible. So that, I guess, was a really interesting and inspiring finding for us through the research. The third theme that we found, the environment can change. Now, participants' ideas regarding capacity to change really were underpinned by a belief that positive environmental change had occurred from reduced human activity. So the idea that COVID had reset the earth was shared among participants. Participants connected how these examples and media stories can be useful to influence EFS agendas as shared through practical and palpable examples and demonstrations of how changing the environment positively is possible through collective action. So it was really, quite concrete examples of what's possible through this notion of collective action for the environment. So in the interviews with sustainability education service providers, COVID was recognised to have changed work practices in unexpected and positive ways. So participants noted that COVID, their work environment, including their interactions with others, their reach and the projects that they were working on had changed. Overall, participants really described examples of innovation, adaptation and flexing to the new conditions created through the social restrictions put in place. So what we see here is that, a change of paradigm in participants' workplaces and a change of individual mindsets with regard to personal change towards sustainability actually might act as a springboard for a change of ESD paradigm. Now, you can see here this image on the slide, I think really captures what was inspiring for participants, which David Attenborough so aptly captures in this documentary that obviously was created after the research came through here. But I guess some of the points that I really just want to bring home is that participants suggested that COVID had enabled them to experience and imagine what was previously unimaginable regarding global environmental restoration. So their reflections and perceptual changes were informed through the access to stories and media, through social media and other ways. So these newfound imaginaries energised momentum within the ESD community, understudy to advocate and create more positive change in personal and professional capacities. So I guess these ideas reflect known challenges in EFS regarding the ability to envision alternate futures, as well as the importance of understanding the institutional, cultural and biophysical context in which individuals engage in collective action, including the processes of teaching and evoking social norms. So it's important, I guess, for us just to remember here that participants were already engaged in ESD and to some degree in sustainability practices, as proven by their attendance at the symposium where the data was, where they were recruited. So it's possible that their interests in ESD experiences and the media accounts of changes to the environment were really influenced how it was that they were able to make connections between COVID, collective action, and ESD practice more generally. Anecdotally, although it is beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, what we, I guess, find is that the SSN network was able to act and is acting as a third space to actually facilitate this process of collective identity formation and action for collective change towards sustainability. So these spaces that bring people together, similar to A squared, E squared right here, are really important for cultivating and establishing those connections and building momentum to inspire change for that, that better future that we all want. And just, I guess, before I close, some further points that I do just want to mention is that the social and lifestyle changes generated during COVID really served as an example of how quickly it's possible to change when needed. And educators here can be drawing on this as an example to showcase for students actually what's possible when we put our minds to it. Collective action and collective change is absolutely possible. Nonetheless, I guess there's still many challenges associated with developing inclusive and holistic approaches to ESD, which we need to acknowledge, recognising pressure to educators, parents and children, particularly during the pandemic and continuing during the pandemic with the moves to online. So while we acknowledge and recognise that COVID here has really demonstrated how they've changed the hearts and minds, in a sense, of the people we were speaking with, we need to bear this in mind and in context to how we might be able to take these learnings forward in our engagement with education more broadly. The other thing we need to be mindful of is that this is a single case study of Western and Anglo-Saxon people in a Western and Anglo-Saxon nation, and it also reflects a small sample size. So the results here may not necessarily reflect the broader views of others in the community. And on that point, I do just want to acknowledge the deep loss and tragedy that has occurred around the world because of COVID and continues to cause devastation around us, and recognise that the participants actually that we're hearing from here, the voices that are being brought to the fore are some of the most privileged global citizens in the world, in the context that we're in at the moment as well within COVID. And so with that in mind, these experiences are in no way intended to be representative of any experiences beyond their own. So I'll leave it there. I did just want to, I guess, close on this image here, reflecting that while at the very beginning of COVID, where this data was collected, everyone was very inspired by the environmental change that we were able to see. But as time goes on, there are further environmental impacts that COVID is having, which may be influencing how people are thinking and relating COVID to the environment and to EFS in the future. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. Please get in touch if you'd like any further information, and please have a look at the paper if you'd like to know a little bit more. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kim. It's amazing to think that there are even some benefits that can be gleaned from the pandemic that we're currently in. And face masks as waste are the new norm. It's a very strange world we live in. Right. I'm trying not to be too somber, but on that note, I'd like to invite you out to lunch in the foyer. And just so that you're all aware, you need to head to the business where you ordered your lunch from. That's where you'll get your lunch. We'll be reconvening at 1:15 for our next set of plenary sessions. A reminder this afternoon, Belinda McCauley is holding a special limited capacity forest therapy workshop, so head to the registration table for details and to sign up if there are any spots left. Thank you very much, everyone, and enjoy your lunch. Thank you. See you soon, Zoom people. Can't forget that.